Now here's your host, Terry Wild.
What a treat to have you tuning in to Wild About Liberty. We've had a great program recently with Neil Mammon and Lawrence Hebron. And these two guys know a lot about a lot of things, but they know Jesus Christ. They know the Bible, and we're involved in the political time of our country. And it's such a joy to be able to hear your perspective, Neil and Lawrence, and we're doing another show together. So why don't you introduce yourself, Neil, and tell us about what you're doing, and then Lawrence. Thank you.
Well, if you watched the last show, you kind of know that I am a refugee from San Jose to Idaho, and we came here about a year and a half ago, got really involved. I run the VAC, Values Advocacy Council, which is an organization designed to bring Christians and pastors involved in politics.
A great organization.
God's laws, basically.
Well, you know, I didn't really get to it on the other program, but what's your website address?
It's vac.org. So
vac.org.
.org for Values Advocacy Council.
And it's a great organization. And Lawrence, San Bernardino County School Board, tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, unlike Neil, I'm not a refugee. I'm still stuck here. So I'm just trying to make the best of the situation as I can. And for many years, I've been involved in a lot of Christian and patriot activities. These core values of America are so important to us, and they've been eroded away, I think, deliberately for quite some time now, and we just need to get back to them. You know, if we put the Bible and the Constitution in front of us and just honor that, we'll do just fine.
Well, you're jumping in, though. You're right in the deep end of the pool. You're running for school board.
Yeah, it seems like the last few years, school board has become kind of the battleground. We see so many of the things in the news happening, even here in Southern California, Temecula Valley, Chino Valley, Murrieta Valley. I'm not in any valley, but I'm running for Redland School Board. And yeah, there are some big issues going on here, especially when you consider that, we mentioned the last show that sooner or later, evil always comes after the children. And it's pretty apparent right now that that's exactly what's happening. And it's motivating a lot of people to get involved who never had been involved before. So I'm hopeful that this will be a battleground that will suit us, that we'll have good ground, as they say in the military, and that we can use that to accomplish a tremendous victory.
Well, you know, America is unique. And the way we formed this country, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, it just came together. And I personally just believe God helped and did that for us and brought us into this a marvelous relationship with him and with this country. And really, it is an American dream. It's a dream worth dreaming. And we're doing everything we can to live in that dream and fulfill it. But it's unique. And so other countries, they have different levels of democracy and the way they run their government, but our inalienable rights come from God. But, you know, that's true of our opponents. They have the same inalienable rights that we do, and we're not superior in that way. America has given every one of its citizens those inalienable rights, and if they don't agree with us, they have the right to exist. They have a right to be Americans. They can push their agenda, their point of view. If they want to live a homosexual lifestyle and are not breaking the law, they have the right under God to do that. But where I think Christians fail to understand the importance of honoring those rights is that we settle our disputes at the ballot box. That's where we decide who runs the country. That's where we decide who makes the laws, who sits in the seat of the judge and the Supreme Court. So if Christians and people of faith want the country to run according to God's standards, it's up to them. The burden is on them to get themselves out to vote and to get others out to vote. How do you see that, Neil?
Well, the thing that most people forget, by the way, Terry, your video is frozen for us. Not sure if you know that. The thing that most people forget is that most Christians forget is that they think that non-Christians do not need to be upholding God's laws. And you can see, and we mentioned this briefly, immediately you can see that means if we were to think that non-Christians don't need to uphold God's laws, that means that non-Christians don't need to observe that other people have inalienable rights. Because that's one of God's laws, right?
Right.
So if you're going to say, well, we can't hold non-Christians to biblical moral standards. Okay, where do you want to draw that line? Well, okay, you can go out and kill anybody. You can go out and violate people's unalienable rights. They'll be like, well, no. But murder, we all know murder is wrong. Yes, but we don't all know that people have unalienable rights. So at what point do you want to stop Christian influence on politics? In fact, let's go through the list of things that we have imposed on the world. Let's look at all the political things that Christians have gotten involved in. And I've said this many times before on the show. We stopped child sacrifice. We stopped gladiatorial combat. We stopped death games, which is different from gladiatorial combat, by the way, in case you didn't know that. We stopped child abandonment. We stopped elder abandonment. We stopped the abuse of prisoners. We stopped wife kidnapping. We stopped the killing of the throwing of widows on their husbands' funeral pyres. We stopped the killing of the superstitious killing of twins. We can go down the line. There are thousands and thousands of laws that Christians stopped in the public square, usually at a time when nobody else agreed with them. In fact, when we stopped child sacrifice, people were very upset about that. When we stopped gladiatorial combat, the guy who stopped the gladiatorial combat was killed. Wow. In the gladiatorial field, while he was trying to stop it. He was a Bishop Telemachus. He went there and he tried to stop it, and they killed him in the middle of the gladiatorial games because he was trying to stop it. He was very unpopular, and yet days later, the emperor came to his senses and banned all gladiatorial combat. And we've done this over and over and over again. When we stopped slavery, William Wilberforce was the most unpopular man in all of England. Why? Because he was the one single politician who was trying to stop slavery. And so you go this over and over again. We see Christians have gone in place of culture, against the culture, and we've stopped evil things. And now, if I talk to an atheist who doesn't believe in God, who doesn't have any source for his unalienable rights, he believes that people have unalienable rights. He believes that, there should be no slavery. He believes that women should not be kidnapped and forced to marry the person they got kidnapped by. Why? Well, that's not an atheist value. That's not a Muslim value. It's not a Hindu value. That's not a Buddhist value. That's not a secular value. That's not a New Age value. That's a Christian biblical value. And the only reason it's Christian and biblical, and the only reason that atheist thinks it's okay, is because he's lived under that law, because laws can change your heart towards good things, just like bad laws can change your heart towards bad things. And that atheist is borrowing Christian moral capital. And that's why we need to be involved in politics.
That's what makes you a Christian apologist. I mean, I'm loving everything you're saying. Lawrence, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think Neil hits on a really important point that a lot of Christians miss and would probably just as soon continue to miss. And that is that Christianity is a disruptive movement. It always has been. It is a disruptive movement.
It got a few people crucified, didn't it?
Yeah. God himself came into the mix to change things, not to let things continue to go on. It is a disruptive movement. And if you're not willing to be disruptive, well, there's limitations to just how thoroughly you can be a good Christian. So one of the things here, if you look back on history, you'll see that the vast majority of movements that really accomplish something significant, they have not been reform movements. They've been replace movements.
Ooh.
And the American Revolution is a good example of that. For decades, we tried to work with the British to reform our relationship with them, and it didn't work. They were happy with the way things were going, and we weren't. And finally, it got to the point where it was so bad, we said, okay, give me liberty or give me death. And a lot of them opted to fight for that. So it was a replace movement. We replaced the British rule with our own notion of government, and it proved to be phenomenally successful. And Christianity is the same thing. It's a replace movement. We're trying to replace lies with the truth. We're trying to replace evil with good. We're trying to replace hell with heaven. So this is our work. And if you're, like I said, if you're not comfortable with being disruptive and involved with a replace movement, then there's only so far you can go as being what Christ told us to be, to go and make disciples.
Yeah, and that's really
disciples.
That really is the justification for Christians being involved in civil government, being involved in politics. Neil, it's something that we were really compelled to do if we're going to fulfill our obligation to serving God and representing Him as a witness and as a testimony. We can't avoid politics as Christians, can we?
No, we can't. I mean, how heartless can you be to say that women should be able to be thrown in their husband's funeral pyres? You take a widow and throw her on a husband's funeral pyre and burn her alive. That's what the Hindus did for years, until a Christian came to India and said, this has got to stop, and got involved politically and stopped that practice. I mean, it's a horrible thing. Same thing that happened in Africa with killing twins. Here in America, child prostitution was legal till a Christian got involved and decided to stop it. I mean, you can go down the line of all these things. How heartless can we be? I mean, what do we just stand around and say, well, I'll just preach you the gospel? And this is something I've said. It's like, look, William Wilberforce could have said, you know what, God has just told me to preach the gospel, so I'm going to go find those slave ships. I'm going to preach to those slaves that are dying in those holes below deck. They're laying flat. They can't even stand up. They're dying of dysentery and sickness and disease. They're in their own filth because they're all manacled. They can't move. But I'll bring cushions and salve for them, and I'll preach them the gospel. That's what I'll do.
Well, that guy gave what a life he lived.
Yeah, and how heartless can we be? People are dying. And let me go a step further. And this is something I've told pastors. I said, look, let's say you're a pastor of a large church. Let's say you've got 1,000, 2,000 people in your church, and you have a parking lot that can hold 500 cars. Let's say city council tomorrow decides that your parking lot should only hold 300 cars. You're going to lose 200 parking spots. Okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, hey, I should never get involved in politics? I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to tell the next Sunday, you're going to tell everybody, show up on Tuesday at the city council meeting.
Exactly.
And tell those politicians that they better give us back our parking lot. Otherwise, we're going to make sure they never get elected again. Well, guess what? That's just parking. People don't die because of parking, but people are dying because that city council is making decisions that are killing people through homosexuality and transgenderism and all their laws, their socialistic laws. And you don't care one whit that they're dying. But when the parking lot is at risk, then you don't show up.
That will convert any pastor right there. You take those parking spots. It just happens that I was the head of our church growth service committee. We took a church from about 60, 70 people to 600. And the number one consideration for church growth, parking.
Parking.
That's kind of amazing that you brought it up. But Lawrence, I think of our American history. Of course, Satan wants to destroy any positive attribute of what America stands for. And that's what's going on today. The whole issue of racism and wokeism and phobism, everything is out to destroy America. And America was never perfect, never. It always had an element of evil. So it isn't as though we're trying to picture this country as some perfect thing. It never was. But it always had the perfect dream, the perfect ideal, and to be a part of it and to fight for it and to preserve it is a worthy cause. And I think Lawrence, of George Washington, the guy could have been a king. He could have run the country until he died, but he walked away because of the ideal and because of the appreciation for that Constitution and that way of life. Our first president walked away from power while the other president was coming in the front door. And then you've got these people that said, my only regret is I have but one life to give to my country. And on and on and on. We have a heritage worth keeping and worth fighting for that's under attack right now.
Absolutely. I'm not sure about this. Maybe Neil recalls, but I think it was Paul Harvey. He was a radio commentator, and one of his famous presentations was entitled "If I Were the Devil."
Yep, Paul Harvey.
If I were the devil. And I'll tell you what, as I look around what's happening in America and what's been happening there, and I've been observing this since the mid-60s. I have been observing and participating in political action since the mid-60s. So that's well over half a century. And as I see what's going on, it's positively demonic. You know, if the devil were in charge of things going on in a lot of politics, and I believe he is in one form or another, he would be doing exactly the things that are being done now. You look at I believe that everything makes sense. A lot of people think that what's happening out there is crazy. I think everything makes sense from a certain perspective. I believe that even that guy pushing a shopping cart filled with trash, wearing 8 layers of clothes when it's 110 degrees out, and he's doing his little dance while shouting at the devil, that makes sense to him. And if we knew what was going on inside his head, we'd say, oh, that's why you're doing that. I see, I disagree, but I see. Well, if that's the case, then that becomes a very powerful tool to analyze what's happening in the country, because we can basically reverse engineer this.
Exactly.
Why would you want to defund police? Why would you want to tear down statues of famous Americans? Why? And it always comes back to the same answer for me, that there is a power elite that is involved in a conspiracy to destroy America. And who wants to destroy America most of all? Satan. Because America was founded on godly, biblical, Christian principles. And we just went crazy. We just went wild with success because we honored God and God blessed us, which is, by the way, one of the covenants that, God kept repeating throughout the Bible. It says, if you do it my way, I'll bless you. If you don't do it my way, all bets are off. See what happens without me. And it never works out well. So we did it God's way and it worked. It boils down to this. Without God, you cannot win. With God, you cannot lose.
I like that.
Our enemies have been trying to separate us from God and godly ways of doing things for decades. And the results have been very obvious. Increasing crime, families falling apart, the moral decay. It just goes on and on and on. Everything from drugs to whatever, prostitution. You just see that as we've moved away from godly ways of doing things, it's just all been falling apart. And that should have been obvious. It should have been predicted. And I don't think the people on the other side are that stupid. I think they know exactly what they're doing.
They do know. And Neil, you and Kevin McCary started Every Black Life Matters. And as a response to the attack and to the effort that was being made to make America look bad and just make it all racist. And when I went into the Army, 1964, I'm 77. So 1964, I'm 18 years old. I joined the Army in Oakland, California. And so we're supposed to take our basic training at Fort Orr. They had, first of all, it's a country club location I thought I was going to enjoy. But instead, they sent me to Fort Polk, Louisiana. So all the way to Louisiana in 1964. Well, you can imagine the racial makeup of that area at that time. And we were on a bus, there's 100 of us or so from California, all being sent to this place in Louisiana. And we stopped the bus. There was a roadside food service thing out there. And they didn't want to serve the black soldiers or enlistees that were on the bus. And it just became almost an electric shock. There was this current that went through that whole group of people, 100 people, and we said, if you're not serving our friend, this black boy, then we're not buying your food. We all got back on the bus and we told the driver, keep going. We're not going to stop here. that was a moment in history for me. That was a time when I stood up, other people stood up in a place where it was just natural for them to be segregated. They wouldn't let black people participate in all kinds of things. And we know that history very well. But for me, I lived that history and I saw it firsthand, and it made me proud of this country. It made me want to stand up for this country. Tell us about Every Black Life Matters.
So the principle behind it was when we saw what was going on with George Floyd and the resulting fighting and burning and looting, we noticed one thing is that none of this was going to help the Black community at all. And we talked to some people who wanted to show that they weren't racist, and they thought the way to show that they weren't racist was to join BLM. But BLM is a Marxist, communist group of devil worshippers. I mean, they're basically witches, and most people don't realize that. So we said, well, okay, we gotta find an alternative to this, because there is Black plight, and that's something that most people don't realize. The Black family has been destroyed by the government. The Black family has had a targeted effort by the government to remove fathers, and this has caused all the problems in the Black community. So as a result of that, what we thought is, okay, we got to have some real solutions. We went down and we looked at BLM's stated purposes and their motto and their goals and their principles, and we found out that every single one of them was designed to hurt Black people. Like, they didn't believe in the nuclear family. They believed in welfare being handed. I mean, you can go down. They weren't pro-life in any sense of the word. I mean, just go down the list. It doesn't matter. And so we took every one of their principles and we said, the best principle we can have is the opposite of their principles. And so that's how we came up. And we said, well, we want to be in the same vein. We want to have a similar name, and we want to be able to play the game where you think Black Life Matters. Well, let me ask you this. Does every single Black life matter? And so we decided to come up with a name that was so similar to theirs. So they are Black Life Matters, and we say, and ours is Every Black Life Matters.
From the womb to the tomb.
So basically Black lives matter, everyone, so and by that, we're not saying that white lives don't matter. We're saying that Black lives matter too, but let's look at it. If you want to play that, if you want to say that, let's go down that line. And so now whenever we get into a discussion, somebody says, well, Black lives matter, we'll say, well, does every single Black life matter? Does the fatherless Black life matter? Does the unborn Black life matter? Does the school children, the kids stuck in that horrible school Black life matter? And you can go down that line. In fact, I was going to say, when we talked about the proposition to bring school choice, 80% of Black parents want school choice for their kids, because they know that those public schools are not doing their kids any service. In fact, they're doing them a disservice. And the way we can tell that is if you look at the literacy. Now, people say, well, the reason why Black schools are doing bad is because of racism. No. If you go back to the 1930s, at the height of racism, the Black literacy rate was 70%. I mean, 70% of all Blacks could read or write proficiently. Today, if you go look at the Black literacy rate in those inner city schools, it's 17%.
Wow.
That means only 17% of all kids can read or write and get a job in English. This is, I mean, you could go to any city in India and they have a higher literacy rate in English, right?
Wow.
You can go to any city in Africa and they have a higher literacy rate than English if it's in a main town, right?
Amazing.
But not in African American communities. Why? Well, it's not racism, because there's far less racism now than there was in 1930. It's purely government involvement. It's purely the government has gotten involved, and the government needs to get out of that business. And part of that is to get out of the education business. So that's where Every Black Life Matters came in. And it's been pretty successful in the sense that we've been able to advocate for a lot of change in people's minds.
What's the website address for that, by the way? I'd love for people to go to the site.
Yeah, everyblm.com, everyblm.com.
Well, watching that unfold and seeing you guys do that organization, we have been here in Fresno for 4 years. We operate Liberty Coalition. We have a building that's about 1,600 square feet, something like that. So we've been doing Liberty Lunch every Wednesday from 12 to 1:30 for 4 years with a few exceptions. And it becomes almost a shock to hear the accusation of racism, especially among conservatives. And because our room is full of Mexican people, we have black people, we have Hmong people, we have all kinds of nationalities and races. And I don't think we even think of race. It doesn't even come up. We don't have a conscious thought about racism among ourselves. We get along great. We work together. We love each other. And then to hear the other side make that accusation, it's like, what are they talking about? What world do they live in? And that's not to say there isn't racism. There is. But the more Christians that are in the room, the likelihood of racism just disappears. It just goes away.
That's what Lawrence said, right? He said, if you want to see how to break down a nation, start bringing up all these problems. And one of them is that what we are convinced BLM is trying to do, or was trying to do, because they've kind of now disappeared off the scene. They were trying to create a race war. They were trying to create racial strife amongst the races because it wasn't there. I mean, yeah, they were racist, but the average American. I'll give you a great example. When I came to America in the 1980s, and I graduated with my master's degree and bachelor's degree in solid state physics and electrical engineering, computer engineering, a bunch of degrees like that. But anyway, so I come to work in Silicon Valley, and I make friends with this young guy who's in college, and he's going to De Anza College at the time, right? Mm-hmm. And one day, and we're like best friends. We hang around, we do everything together. We play games, basketball and stuff like that. We're just hanging out all the time. Well, one day we're at lunch or something, and he says, I got a problem. I said, what? He said, well, I'm going to college. I said, yeah. He said, well, I have this assignment. I'm supposed to interview somebody from a different culture, from a different country, and I don't know anybody from different countries.
Isn't that something? That is funny.
Wow. I don't know people from other races. And I'm sitting, because this is Silicon Valley in 1980s, right? So it's more white than it is today. but I'm sitting there looking across the table. I'm like, dude, I'm reporting Ghana. I'm from India. And he looks at me like, oh my goodness, it didn't even occur to me.
That is hilarious.
Like me, right? I mean, this was the level of, he had no concept of a difference between us. And yet here I was, so different from him. And yet he had not seen that. Why? Because he doesn't see through that filter. He and I were brothers in the Lord. We were brothers in all the things that we did. We were friends. We were buddies. He doesn't see that. And that's what Silicon Valley really is today. It's even more that today because, you can't. I remember sitting in a business, on the various companies I had, and I was sitting with an Iraqi, a Jew, a Chinese, and a Russian,
right,
all in the same room, and a French guy too, all in the same room talking technology. We don't see that. That doesn't happen. For anybody to turn around and say, hey, we need wokeness, we need to bring in Black people, we need to bring in Chinese people. No, it's already there. It happens naturally through capitalism and commerce.
Well, Lawrence, what's your take? You've been in the military, you've served, and how do you see this whole issue that they're trying to make race a divider?
Well, it is a tactic. It's a tactic to get some of their people in power, and they talk about identity politics. The idea of that is to cater to a whole collection of small groups until you get to the point where they all add together up to 51% of the population, and then you win. One of the things when Neil was there talking, I remembered something that happened a couple of years back when I was canvassing for the school choice. I was actually in a kind of a separated parking lot for a Christian school. We had to stand, and they were having an event, and with family event and all these families coming there. So we thought this would be a good chance to let them know about the school choice initiative, which would benefit them tremendously. But we had to stand that far away because the school administrators wouldn't allow us. They wouldn't support us, which was always seemed very strange to me. How come the Christian school administrators are so scared of this issue? But anyway, So we, as people would park and they'd walk in there, we'd go over and talk to them and give them some information and talk to them a little bit about school choice. And I ended up having a nice conversation with this Asian lady, and she said something very interesting, that her older daughter had gone to a Christian school, kindergarten through 5th grade. And then she went to a public school. And she came home one day asking about race issues, about, racist, our racist nation. She said, from kindergarten through 5th grade, she was the only Asian person in her class, and nobody treated her as though she were any different than anyone else. There were no issues of race. There was no issues of lack of diversity and all of this. She was just another girl in the class until she went to a public school. And then the public school teacher teaching their curriculum taught her about racism, which she had never experienced until she went to a public school.
Which is another way of saying victimhood.
Yes, yeah. And now you talk about military, reminds me of something else. In the Marine Corps, we used to say everybody is green. We have some light green and we have some dark green Marines, but they're all green Marines. And that was the thing, when you're relying on these guys, possibly for your life, there's a bond that's created, and you don't care how dark their skin is or how light their skin is. You only care about whether they can fight and whether they'll stand up for you. And I remember being at an event. There's an absolutely wonderful organization called Words of Comfort, Hope, and Promise, led by founded and led by a lady named Cynthia Martinez. And I go to many of their events, and one of their events, they have this beach bash where we collect donations from all kinds of organizations and have everything there that the troops can use for their households, clothing, household items, toys for the kids, etc., and so forth. And everything is free. You get to take 2 things from this table and 1 thing from that table. It's just great. And I remember when this happened a couple of years ago, there'd been, I guess it was probably the summer of 2020, when there was so much trouble going on in the nation. A lot of it was racially based. And I remember standing there behind the table where I was helping out, and I saw this cluster of Marines came by, and there was everything under the sun. There were guys that were as white as you can get, as dark as you can get. There's Asians and Hispanic and Anglos. I remember this one guy, he had his name tag on. It had an SKI on the back. So apparently, Polish or Eastern European.
Right.
And they were just having the best time hanging out together. And they were having fun and joking and everything else. That's the real America. And you see that so oftentimes in the military. But there are political groups that have an interest in making us hate each other, to divide us. Instead of the American motto is one nation under God. But we do have another saying, e pluribus unum, which is Latin for out of many, one.
I love that.
A lot of these politicians now are trying to reverse that, e unum pluribus, out of one, many. They're trying to divide us, because as we're divided, we become weaker. And when we become weaker, it becomes easier for them to take over.
And control us and tell us what's best for us, and become the nanny state. And we raise our hand and we ask permission, and there goes our Bill of Rights. There goes our freedoms and our inalienable rights.
Well, Terry, I want to add one more thing to that. I think what most people don't realize is America is the least racist country that I have ever seen. As I mentioned, I've grown up in all these other countries. And
like what? What other countries have you been in? Well,
Ghana, Jamaica, Sudan, Yemen, India, right?
South Africa?
No, I've not actually lived in South Africa, but I talked to a bunch of South Africans when I went to Nigeria, because we were going on a trip actually to Israel. I went on a trip with them. But what's interesting about that, you see, so South Africa, now, if you look at South Africa, before apartheid, it was a very racist nation. But if you look at America today and you look at South Africa today, the racism is actually in reverse. Now it's racism against the whites in many cases, right?
Right.
But the point being that America is the least racist nation I've ever visited. For instance, if you go to India, they have racism built into their religion. They have the caste system, right?
Right.
If you go to the Middle East, Black people are not tolerated amongst the Arabs. The Arabs don't tolerate Blacks, as well as in many cases. In fact, there are many slaves, still African slaves. If you go to other parts of the world, I mean, if you go to Europe, if you're not from their local country, they don't look upon you as equally as if you're from their thing. In fact, you can go to Somalia. If you're from a different village, you're not treated equally. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. Almost every country has more discrimination than America. Yet in America, why do so many people want to come to America? Because it's a land of opportunity. In fact, here's the deal. If I go to any of these other countries and I look at who makes the most money, it's going to be the upper class people that makes the most money.
Right.
Who makes the most money in America? It's the Indians. It's the Indians, and then comes the Taiwanese. and then, get this, number 4 are the Nigerians and the Ghanaians. Black people make the 4th or 6th and 5th most amount of money in America. Now, I'm not talking about the multi-billionaires. They're few and far between. But if you start looking at all the Indians, the average income, the median income, Indians make the median income, and then we get the Taiwanese, and then, as I said, about 4 or 5 of them, at number 4 or 5, you start getting the Chinese. In fact, the first European, the first whites don't show up until much later.
So white privilege is out the door, right?
There is no white privilege in America because the Indians have taken over, right? Now, but why is it so? And I want to tell you a quick story. Years ago, when I first came to America, I just graduated and I was working for Advanced Micro Devices, and my cousin was working for AMD as well. And I remember one day we were over at his house and we were talking about how do we get rich in America? This is the 1980s, early mid-1980s. How do we get rich in America? And my cousin said, well, the only way we can get rich is if we do a startup company. We've got to start our own company. And then, and I said, yeah, but how do we get funding? He says, yeah, that's the problem. In America in 1987, you can't get funding unless, and he said, the only way we can get funding is we have a white guy with a big nose who drinks a lot of beer. He'll get the funding for us, and then we can start a company. I said, well, okay, no problem. Let's find this white guy with a big nose who drinks a lot of beer. He'll get the funding. We'll do the company. We'll get rich, and then he can share in the profits. And at that point, my nephew says, well, that's not right. And I said, who cares if it's right or if it's not right? If we can make money by using the opportunities we have here, in a few years, they'll be coming to us for the funding. And guess what? In Silicon Valley today, you cannot get funding unless you know an Indian. Why? Because the Indians run all the VC firms.
Well, that is a perfect example of the opportunity that America gives people.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the hope. You know, it's based on your own merits and your own ingenuity and the opportunity to have the ability to make money or whatever it is you want to do. That's the freedom that is being put down by the other side, trying to tear us down, trying to divide us, trying to make us believe what? A lie, deception.
For, as Larry said, for their own purposes.
Satan has come to kill, to steal, and to destroy us. We live in a country that has given us what? Opportunity. Yep. And, you know, I was born in Canada. Now, I look at Canada today, and it breaks my heart. It's a Marxist country. But coming here, all we saw was in Southern California in 1952, where all these orange groves in Southern California, they were ripping them out and building tract houses. That's what we ended up buying. But it was the opportunity to be here. And so every Black Lives Matters is a huge thing in my mind. What you guys did, what you and Neil, what you and Kevin did, was you gave us a way. When I was handing out papers in Southern California, your face was on the front page, I think.
Yeah.
And it was an article about every Black Lives Matters and the logo. And so I had cover. I was able to go out into the neighborhoods and deliver these to the homes, and people waving at me. Now, I don't know what happened after they read the article, but thank you for that. So,
well, you know, and that's the door in. Once you get in, because a lot of people are free biased to be liberal because they bought the lie, right?
Exactly.
One of the reasons why we wanted the name very similar is that we wanted that door in so people would look at it, read it unbiasedly. In fact, here's what's the funniest thing is, I'd be wearing every Black Lives Matters T-shirt, and I would be in a Uber or something, and there'll be a black Uber driver, and he would read my T-shirt and goes, yeah, yes, I agree. And then I would say something like, well, this is not the principles that BLM stands for. And I would get one of two reactions. The first one I would get is, I hate BLM. They've never done anything else for us Black people except causes more problems. Or the other one would be like, really? I thought that's what BLM stood for.
Yeah.
So you get both of those reactions. I'm like, no, this is the opposite of what BLM. He goes, well, how can anybody be, because it says active fatherhood. And he would say, how can anybody be against fatherhood?
Well, one of the success stories, Lawrence, that I personally witnessed was we had 400,000 Vietnamese come to Santa Clara County, basically within the Silicon Valley, and they came with nothing. They came with the clothes on their back. They came with just families, and they created a success story that is really inspiring in Silicon Valley, in Santa Clara County. And I was part of some of that, doing business with different Vietnamese business people. And their story was an example of the American dream, how they worked hard. They put their restaurants together. So the best food I've ever had in my life. And so we really are a country of opportunity, aren't we, Lawrence?
We are, and I can add a little bit to that. I don't think you knew this about me, but I was at Camp Pendleton when Vietnam finally fell, 1975. In fact, we were preparing for a landing exercise, and our company commander came in one day and said that the landing may be in Vietnam because it was failing, and the President Ford hadn't made the decision yet whether or not he wanted to go in, but we had a whole regimental landing team ready to go. And so all we had to do was turn everything around, sail the other direction. But we didn't. But I say then Vietnam came to me. About a week or so after that, the first refugees started coming, and Camp Pendleton provided one of the major refugee camps. It was up at Camp Talaga at the north end of the base, right by San Clemente. And I was assigned to be the officer in charge of a 150-man working party. I was with Tank Battalion. Tank Battalion got assigned this 150-man working party. I actually had more people under my command than the battalion commander.
Wow.
For 2 weeks. But I saw them coming in right at the beginning. And they were literally living in military tents. They had what are called GP, or general purpose tents. And that's where they lived. We put them in tents, this is a step above being homeless. You've got a tent, and we had the mess halls, and we'd feed them and all of that. That's how they started out. And when you look at how they've succeeded, like you've commented on this, they have been great in starting businesses. They have certain areas that they concentrate. You mentioned about food. I understand it was kind of interesting. They said that different groups from Asia would focus in different areas. Like the Koreans would have a donut shop, and the Vietnamese would have nail shops.
Yeah, exactly.
Other businesses
they
as
did.
well, things like that. And they've just, and I had one as a tenant a few years ago. I had some commercial property, and I had a lady was a tenant. She had a nail shop, and she's the one who told me this. So this isn't some racist thing. She said, oh yeah, well, we don't go into the donut business because that's for the Koreans. We don't want to cause trouble there. And they don't go into nails because that's our business. And she was just, she lived in, actually when they escaped because her dad had worked for the government, which was associated with America. So they were all in danger, and they escaped to Cambodia. They lived in a Cambodian camp for a while until they were able to come over to the United States legally. So they just started with absolutely nothing. And now she and her whole family are entrepreneurs, having a very successful business, doing very well. And in less than one generation, in fact, and within about...
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah. Well, let me add to that, Terry, real quick. So if you look at them, like for instance, I was back in San Jose, there was a Vietnamese lady who cut my hair, right? and I was talking to her, and she was talking about all the travels she had done. And I'm like, how does she manage it on, I'm paying her what, $12 a haircut? How does she manage it on $12 a haircut? And then as she talked more and more, I realized that all 3 or 4 of her kids were like doctors and lawyers and engineers.
Exactly.
And she was just enjoying life.
Nice.
She just did the haircutting now because she had put them through college. I mean, school and high school and college. And now they were all really successful. And she had a nicer car. I mean, she had this beautiful, I came in with a pickup truck, Toyota pickup truck. She goes, oh, that's a nice truck. I wanted to get one of those. And sure enough, like a few months later, she had one of those.
Wow.
I was like, see, this is the point. America is such a great land of opportunity. Maybe you have to work hard, but you're going to be able to pass that legacy on to your
Amen. Well, we're getting to the end of our program here, you guys. What a treat. I love being with you. Thank you for tuning in. Wild About America. Watch this show. In the near future, you're going to see Neil, Lawrence, and I doing more of these kinds of shows. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Wild About Liberty with Terry Wild, only on KXCX 1550.